So my name is Tykee James. I work at the well, yeah, I'm an environmental advocate by day, but birder by every minute that I see a flapping feathered thing. I started bird watching. I started birding. Oh yeah, sorry. So I'm with the DC Audubon Society too. I'm a board member for them actually, and we are currently interviewing board members because we have folks rotate off. So we are currently looking for one more board member before the end of the year because we have another person rotating off. So if that is something that you're interested in, please let me know. But yeah, so just FYI, DC Audubon Society, there's our mission. It's and actually one of the things that we've added to this is a guarantee. Well, I mean, this was pre-COVID, but the guarantee and promise that our community work would lead us to bird walks in all 8 wards. But you know, COVID. But this is nice too. This is great. Uh, so my first job was an environmental educator. And my first assignment was to, like a book report, study the belted kingfisher. And study, so you look in your Sibley, you look in the Peterson guide, Crosley, if you will. Find the thing that makes the most sense, fill out the questions about it, and then we would see you at work the next week, and you would provide a presentation of your book report, so to speak. And it was when I came to work that second week that I saw the female belted kingfisher. It wasn't on this rusty thing. It was on a cattail, and it did its call while it crossed the creek. And being present for that moment and being present for that experience unknowingly put me on the path on conservation. Because when I was attending college at the time, I was a mathematics computer science teacher. I wasn't good at it, but that's what I thought I wanted to do. But like the birds kept calling and I stayed with the birds. So being with the birds, that is, I've been a part of the birding community for about a decade now. And most recently, you may have seen or heard or interacted with Black Birders Week. I had a role in organizing that. If you see on the National Audubon Society's Facebook page, there's 2 conversations that we have where we discuss birding while Black. And in the first conversation, we have Chris Cooper. And the second conversation, we have Dr. J. Drew Lanham. I please encourage everybody to check those out. Those are really great. And I want to answer questions about that at any point if folks have any. Like I said, I am kind of skipping through the intro because I do want to have this be as interactive, as engaging as a conversation. It's easier to make jokes that way too for everybody. So speaking of jokes, this slide is not funny, but it's very, very plain, and but it exists to give the information of what these basic principles are. But I don't want to glorify these as like the, creating an encrypted language of glory behind how we, ascribe principles to looking at birds. I just think this is a really good basic. You can take what you want from this and use that as your answering of questions when you're trying to identify a bird. So, like, of course, your first question often is, who is the bird? I've stopped saying what for birds. I'm like, who's that bird? Because I want to be introduced to it. And for me to understand who that bird is, I have to understand their shape. And I think specifically to mention, and I know I do it, it looks kind of, because it is, but repetitive, but I put shape first twice because I think you should always look at shape first. Shape is, the give or take some weird things that you may see or not see on the bird, like a crest may be there and it's not there as much. Shape is one of the most reliable ways to identify that bird. Then size judgment. And size judgment can be hard if you've never seen the bird before and the bird is on a branch where you can't necessarily see or provide judgment to the size of that bird in relation to anything else. So that's why I kind of rank it as the second most reliable. And then color perception, which, one time I saw a blue jay at dusk and it was completely golden. It was the most beautiful bird I've seen. And I thought that I discovered a new bird. And I was like, oh my goodness, I call it the phoenix bird, which could be redundant, but I really was believing, but it was just because of the color. And it was just like, well, it did look like a jay. So maybe I should have called it a phoenix jay because the shape was undeniable. It was the color perception that threw me off. And seeing and documenting detail is a slide that I'm going to hit on. But that's something that I wish I grew more as a birder. So like I said, I've been birding for about a decade, and I have not done a good job at practicing this, but I do preach it, and that is having a field journal, so that when you see details and you document them, you have them all in your little black book. This is my planner. Maybe I should use that for field guides too. Anyway, when you see and document detail and have it in your memory, yeah, that's one thing. But when you have it in your written down memory, and you start to not just use words, but start to color things in, or start to sketch out what that shape is of the bird, or maybe just one part of the bird, that really helps when you're thinking about what those details are and how to make those details come alive to you. And then also knowing your common birds. DC Audubon Society has a familiar 15 list that we'll also hit on. Here's the familiar 15. I think that these are birds that I consider like practice kind of birds, because, and don't write all these down, these are gonna be in your email soon. But when you look at these birds and you try to get detail from some of these birds, that's where you can really start to break down and start to have a little fun with topography of a bird. I don't know all of the scientific words, but supercilia is a really fun one. And if you don't know that one yet, please start saying it more. Supercilia, supercilia, supercilia. So familiar 15, knowing your basic birds, or not basic, but your familiar birds, that helps you build those skills of seeing detail, because you're like, okay, anytime that I'm looking for the white-throated sparrow, yeah, I'm going to look for that white throat, but maybe I should look to see if there's like that yellow on the eyebrow, let me see if I can see that. Maybe I will be able to get the wing bars a little more if I look. Oh, I love the drawing resources. Oh yeah. John Muir laws. John Muir, that's a familiar name. So when I talk about documenting detail, I did talk about using field guides. But one of my most favorite ways to bird, and I'm really upset I don't have that. Can you guys wait? I'm going to get my binoculars. Oh man, one person left. Somebody just left right when I got up. I knew it. So all the pictures that I took were taken just like this. And that this is just a phone. This is a Google Pixel, just a regular pair of binoculars. Athlon. If I haven't pronounced that before. But that was one of the ways that I got to take pictures of these birds, and then on my own time, really, really look at the pictures, and then zoom in on the picture and really think about what that shape is. How would I describe that shape to somebody else? And size judgment. All of these are pretty hard. Maybe not so much the bird by the bird feeder, but all of these are kind of difficult to see their size. Because I know what the birds are, but even then I don't really know what the bird sizes are. I would say color perception on these two are not too bad. I mean, you can really see a brown head and kind of an iridescent on the wing there, and this is clearly white. Oh yeah, and there's our starling. Fun fact about the starling, and I said this during Black Birders Week. Um, oh, I said this during Black Birders Week. Tuesday was post a bird pic, and or Monday was post a bird pic, and I posted this picture of the European starling. And the fun fact that I had for it, I don't know how fun this fact is, but I always want to mention it anytime I see a starling, because everybody, when they see a starling, is always, Um, so the starling's ancestors and my ancestors share a similar fate in that we were both brought over across the Atlantic in ships against our will, and we're both just here. This one's just chilling, just like me, on this call. Well, maybe I don't know if that Starling does podcasts, but um, it'd be interesting. I would listen to it. I wonder what a Starling podcast would be called. I'll think of it. If you think of any, please put it in the chat. I'd appreciate the thought on it. So this is another way to really emphasize that idea of seeing detail and trying to document that detail. And again, these both of these pictures were taken on my phone with the binoculars, and that I think it's called digiscoping. But I would really think that I would really endorse people to learn that, get patient and get patient with it, because being able to take photos like that, like I'm not going to buy a fancy camera to take these, take bird photos. I mean, I might buy a fancy camera one day to do like film, like that would be cool, but yeah, I'm not buying. And also, like, these shots were taken from my backyard, and I have a little fenced off backyard in Mount Pleasant. So there's like an alleyway. There's not a lot of trees, but for the few trees that there are, I do get some birds. And being able to take these pictures, be familiar with this bird, think about the different. Oh, well, sorry. Thinking about the different ways I would describe, like, this is kind of like a mask and a bib, and yeah, this is really puffy. This is not typically the shape that you would see a house sparrow, but you can't even see the legs. And then same house sparrow, just turned around, and now you get a really good look at the feathers, like individual feathers, and whatever's going on here. Hopefully they can clean that up. Oh, well, Allison says those Shakespeare birds. Okay, so I would think then, if starlings were to have a podcast, it would definitely be about Shakespeare. That would at least be the topic. I don't know. We can brainstorm about it as we go along, but that's a good thing to mention, Allison. It has to be Shakespeare related. Um. So yeah, seeing detail and trying to document it, and there doesn't have to be a high bar you have to set for it. It's just about how you have fun, and what you do to, in some ways, be proud of the moment that your friends send you pictures of birds, and then they're just like, what bird is this? That's like, I have a sense of pride when that happens. I'm like, I feel a sense of responsibility to this community of non-birders to slowly, and carefully introduce them to birding, because they'll see the house sparrow a million times and think that's not impressive at all. And then when you start to say, well, I want you to tell me what it looks like, since you've seen it so much, really describe and break down what that bird is, they probably wouldn't. But if they want to, I think there's an adventure in that, and there's a little bit of fun, because look at this great bird. Um, so one of the things about birding, and that I think is important in a birding community, is having a constant orientation of these concepts, of these practices, of the culture of birding. And I think one of those really great practices is something DC Audubon Society started doing last month. and that is a birding forecast. We have another one coming up next Thursday. Here it is. Is that? Yep, yep. Next Thursday, where we talk about the birds, like fall migration birds, especially, that we can look forward to in DC. And some of what I said in the beginning of this is going to be reiterated and also brought with more perspective in another conversation next Thursday at this time, ironically. Um, and I'm also debuting this video segment called the Rare Bird Report. And the Rare Bird Report is this, it's kind of an idea. I think it's a full idea. It's an idea that kind of takes a spoof look at a news report, like a breaking news report, and gives, to some degree, a highlight of the rare birds and the stories of their observation of DC. And I think it'd be a really great way to incorporate stories of the birders, not just the birds, incorporate stories of the places, and, not just thinking about them as habitats, but thinking about them as places where people live. And I think, yeah, it would be a really fun idea. Hopefully, if you're free, you can stop by. If not, we're also recording this, putting this on YouTube, and it should be fun. And I think constantly having these orientations for the birding adjacent, or the I want to go birding by myself, I just haven't felt comfortable yet birder. I think having programs like these are going to be really helpful, especially when we're talking about what we can do to make birding more inclusive. So, on the topic of making birding more inclusive, I this is a very rough draft of a concept that I think folks can take and do so much with. If you are thinking about how bird walks can be more inclusive, how do you design inclusivity into a bird walk? I think this is a good model, only because it's so customizable, and I think it uses pretty easy definitions. On a bird walk, you could be all three of these roles, because you could be the person talking about where you're at. You could be the person pointing out the birds, and you're the person with the field guide. But when you can break down those roles and kind of disaggregate the attention and decentralize the chemistry of the group, or at least how the bird walk is being led, I think there are opportunities to be, and have in one bird walk a good form of an inclusive culture. Um, and I think too, this is something that pre-COVID was a great idea, but now that we're in COVID, it's it may be the same idea, just space out everybody a lot more. Um, but outside of that, encouraging folks to bird by themselves, or giving folks that confidence to have to go out in the field and say that I can bird by myself and I feel comfortable doing it. I think that finding resources to encourage that is good, but also recognizing that not everyone's going to feel safe if they go out birding by themselves versus a group. For example, uh, I've started saying that I've been an environmental educator my first job was an environmental educator. My first job, I was birding, and um, I did that for about 5 years. I randomly got a call from a state representative in North Philly, where I'm from. She asked if I could be her scheduler. I said yes, because that sounds like an awesome job. But then when she saw that I was an environmental educator for so long, she asked if I could advise her on environmental policy. I said yes, because that also sounds like fun. And then that really opened my world to seeing that my experience in the outdoors, my experience with birding and environmental education, was relatively unique compared to how most people get into this. Most people have birding as a hobby, not as a job. Most people who are birders are white and a little older, female. And most people that bird live on the East Coast. And that's and so like I didn't like my brain being open to how different and complex this whole community that I'm a part of is, uh, has encouraged me and given me a lot of motivation to say, hey, if I'm going to be a part of this community, I think that there are things we can and should do to make it better, not just for me and you today, but for the people who are going to be birding tomorrow. I think that the birding community at this time, more time, of any, has a very important responsibility in broadening the path of progress for people who care about conservation, people who want environmental progress. Because we have to know we can't attain environmental progress if it's just for white people. If the environmental movement that's set to achieve environmental progress, if all of that is happening just from white people, we're not going to achieve environmental progress. We know that we have progress. We know we have barometers that let us know where we're making progress. And I like to believe birding, and I am a little biased, but birding is the best way to get folks into conservation. It is just so sensitive in its applicability scientifically, but then also how entertaining it could be as a competition. Birding can fulfill so many outlets, whether it's in art or science competition, as I said, or for me, I do it as a lobbyist. I work for the National Audubon Society, and part of my job is to organize bird walks with members of Congress and congressional staff. Part of that experience lets me know that everybody has a story about a bird. Everybody, whether it's your crazy uncle who took you out that one time in the dead of winter to count birds, who would do that? Or if you in your home garden, there's a cardinal that comes by every afternoon, chirps at you and leaves. Everybody has a story. And I love hearing those stories, because you don't get those stories. You don't get to share an experience when you're in a meeting and you can just, talk about the numbers and figures on the table. Anybody can do that. I could put that in an email, but it's just so different and so much more special when you can have a bird walk, have an experience where, um, a member of Congress may recognize that, like, hey, my kids actually go to this park all the time. I didn't know that these kind of birds were here. Or I voted for a bill to put money into protecting this park. So I'm really glad that I did that. I think that, those small little sentences, those small little sentiments add up to a lot when the moment comes and they're on the House floor or they're in the Senate committee and they're thinking about, what am I going to vote for? What do my constituents care about? What do I care about? They're going to think about experiences. They're going to think about how they feel. And part of what they consider is going to be the butterbutt, the yellow rump warbler. Part of what they're going to think about is going to be the conservation of the snowy egret from the MBTA and that history. Part of what they may think about is American oyster catchers. So it's just, it can be so interesting and so fulfilling. I'm obviously preaching to the choir when I'm talking about how awesome birding is. That's also why the birding community is so, important in bringing people into the environmental movement in a way that's inclusive and in a way that when benefits happen, it's a tide that rises all ships. And I think that when it comes down to the question of what can I do in this moment, what can I do to contribute, to help, there's a lot of answers to that question. It depends on what you're doing. There's an interpersonal answer, there's an institutional answer, there's a structural answer. Interpersonally, normalize things. Actually, do I have that slide? Oh man, I'm missing that slide. Trust me, I'm gonna find the slide, and it's gonna make so much sense. But you should normalize your values in your interpersonal life. You gotta operationalize things in the institutional world, and for those structures, you gotta organize against those structures. And organizing against those structures can take a lot of different forms. Operationalizing within the institution to change policy, that can take a lot of different forms. But normalizing what you do in your interpersonal life, I can think of some things off the top of my head. One, say hi and smile. I don't know. Like, how do you be a decent person? Typically, that's not something that is obvious, but or that's something that is obvious, obviously. It's just, we can't forget that this isn't as hard as we're making it. To some degree, it is. How would you like to be treated? To some degree, that's ultimately what it can come down to. Part of the things that you can normalize: using pronouns, using gender neutral pronouns when you don't know. Part of what you can normalize: um, celebrations. When you think about American history, where we are as a country, how we got here, as a birding community. Because what you celebrate is part of your culture. And that is something that you can always learn. You can always learn a new celebration. I think that I'm going to learn to celebrate Black Birders Week every year somehow. Don't know how I'm going to do it next year. Oh man, it was quite a ride this year. I mean, I have said if they make a Big Year remake, they need to include Black Birders Week. That just has to be in there somewhere. I don't know what the new, but also with the Big Year, and now that I have actually an audience for this rant, the Big Year. If we were going to remake the Big Year, there's a lot of places to start. One of the only other female characters in the film is excellent at the bird calls, and they did not go into that at all. I want to see more of that. What? I want to see, I don't know, a bird call competition. Maybe not a competition, but just a montage of that. That's just fun. There needs to be more blackbird. I mean, there needs to be more birders of color in that movie. I mean, Owen Wilson, Jack Black, and Steve Martin, very nice people. Actually, now that I think about it, Jack Black has the body shape of my mentor and my best friend Tony, who taught me how to bird, and we're best friends today. And actually, I was a groomsman in his wedding. They have the same body shape, but he's covered in tattoos. Like Tony is just head to toe tattoos. He's one of those punk rock stars that traveled the world. But while he was traveling the world, he was watching birds. Crazy story about him too, man. Oh gosh. And actually, he and we have a podcast together on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, but I announced it again. I talked about that, like people who who announce that they're sharing their screen and not. Maybe it's courtesy, maybe it's Maybelline, but yeah, Tony and I weren't now best friends, and it's kind of crazy how he got into birding too. But that also just helps inform my perspective that so many people can come to birding and so many people can enjoy it. Coming from who knows where. That's always exciting for me. So I did a lot of talking. I'm going to pull up some stuff to help out, but I want to hear from some of you folks if you do have questions on what I said so far. I don't want to overtalk and have you not feel that you can't ask me a question. Don't worry. I knew I had it. Okay, so one of the things that I talked about in normalize, when we think about that question, what can I do? when you think about what you're normalizing walking the walk and talking the talk. So if your values say that, you know, I don't even know how specific to be, but if your values are you want to make birding an inclusive endeavor. Oh, Judy has a question. How were those 15 birds determined? And what do you mean by organize? Oh, okay. Okay. I like this. These are great questions. Um, on the first point, or let me finish what I'm saying. When you got to normalize demonstrating your values is what I was going to say. Normalize demonstrating your values, and it doesn't have to be something that you put on Twitter. It doesn't have to be something you put on Instagram. It doesn't have to be something that's like public and celebrated. But when you're demonstrating your values, it should be obvious. There should be no question as to why you're demonstrating your values or that you are. If you can normalize and consistently demonstrate your values, especially as it deals with how we achieve anti-racism as a society, how we dismantle white supremacy as a society, normalizing how you demonstrate your values. I think that's one of those things that, I always get as a question that I always want to get in front of. So the question, excuse me, about what do you mean by organize against structures? Yes, here we go. So when I say normalize or organize against structures, I mean there exists, and we know this, forces and a collection of institutions in society that have framed the context of racism as we see today. Redlining, as an example, uh, wealth gap, a great one as well. And those structures exist for a lot of reasons, but they don't have to exist, and they can be dismantled. And one of the ways that they're dismantled is by people, groups of people. Sometimes those groups are affinity groups. Sometimes those groups are employee resource groups. And other times those groups are unions. But all those groups, what they have in common is that it is a collection of workers, people who the structure enables to, or people enable the structure. So when the people organize, well, the hope is when you organize, at least, you dismantle those structures, you dismantle the organizations, you change the organizations so that you have something better. It is something that I talked about at the North American Ornithological Conference. And so when I was talking about organizing, I mean like folks who work in nonprofits, folks who work in higher ed institutions, who exist in these huge structure of how society has been working. But there's things we have to change. And again, some of those things are on an interpersonal level. Some things are slightly larger at the institutional level, like within the group. And some of those things are even bigger at the structural level. And those are the things that we got to organize against. So the 15 birds for the familiar 15, I don't know how they weren't necessarily decided, but I know that eBird had a lot to do with it. They did it by like eBird count, certain times of year, and then different kinds of birds, because it would have been easy just to do like all the backyard bird feeder birds. And then like, well, yeah, then we would miss out on here, let me jump back over to that screen. Oh, I announced it again. I don't know what is up with me. You know, you don't think you'll do it, but then you do it every time. Anybody else get like that? So yeah, on the familiar 15, Yeah, I think the hope was just to get a diversity of birds to some extent. Not all of these I would imagine you would see at your bird feeder, but you would definitely see them doing different things at different times. That's a great question, though. I can do more research to revisit that if you're more interested in an example. Oh, how to interest college students in birding. Give them scholarships. Just give them money. Like, anytime a college student is doing something, you should be like, "Oh, you could get a scholarship for that." That should be a true statement. That should just be a true like anything you're doing as a college student should be worthy of a scholarship. Period. And I'm actually a part of a scholarship situation that I'm going to bring up. Wow, I have so many reasons to share my screen with you all. So this is so exciting. Wow, the questions are really coming in right now. Um, I mean by text, you know what I'm saying? Scholarship. Oh man. See, this is the thing too. I got to remember what's in my email. But yeah, I'm gonna bring up that scholarship information. That's one thing to get them interested. But also, think about too that college students can exist in a different generation, and because of that, they may appreciate different aspects about birding. So just think about how you came to birding one way. Like I'm very forward in saying I came to birding as a job, and that isn't going away from my perspective. I can enjoy birding in other ways, but the first way I've ever did it was as a job, and so that's always my perspective coming into it. And I try to think about the different ways other people can get involved. So a college that would that could potentially be really exciting. I would love to talk to you more if you want to, like, we can talk about the college, maybe think of some fun ideas. People like it when things rhyme, so typically when you have a fun name, people get excited about it. Let's see what's next. And I'm still looking for that scholarship information for you all. But let's see what the next question is. What do you use to connect your iPhone to your binoculars to take a picture? I don't use anything. This is just like the regular degular. And I still have I have a phone case on it too. So maybe, having a phone case kind of helps because I just place it. Like I just want to make sure you can see as I can see it. Um, I just take the phone and just smack it right there, and one's off. But um, and part of it is having that center line and thinking you're bringing up the binoculars to that center line. You're bringing up the phone. It does take some patience. It is not easy, but when you get some easy shots at things that are at eye level, like all my shots were basically at eye level, except that osprey that was like a cool, like I just saw it flying over the house. I was like, what? Um, Spoke about seeing birds in your backyard. Watching in my area has call. I'm sorry, Debbie. Ooh. Somebody asks, can you give an example of operationalize or co-creation? Yes. Um, so if you're a part of an environmental group, you probably have goals and priorities. And some of those goals and priorities are for stakeholder groups. Like they, there exist in those priority stakeholder groups. There's things that you want to accomplish because stakeholder group A will receive benefit B, from us doing this work, whatever that, work may be. And if it's conservation work, that could look as obvious as removing invasives, for example. So you do that and the project ends, and you're, part of what you hope to achieve is doing it in a different neighborhood than your, employee demographic would help to make your organization more inclusive. Let's hope. And then that outcome is not realized. And a big reason why that outcome wouldn't be realized is because the community wasn't part of the creation of all of those steps that led to that benefit. The community was not part of that creation at all. And it's easy to think about ways to include people. Maybe it's easy to think about that. But I know it takes a different level of thought to co-create with someone. To co-create, you have to literally just restructure your whole, like, step back on your how we decide we do things, like that process, create that with the stakeholder group and put that into your operations, like how you work as an organization, as a group of, you know, folks that want to accomplish this main goal. Co-create to achieve that goal, especially when you don't have, or especially when you have a relationship with the community that you're serving. They should be, and I think there's a new model should exist about how that is co-created. So an example is the Next 100 Coalition. The Next 100 Coalition, they had a steering committee meeting that was public, and they asked those questions. What are going to be our priorities? What resources should we be looking for? Are there any partnerships we should be considering? And the function of it was a Zoom call similar to this, and then they dropped in the chat a link to Google Slides PowerPoint where everyone had access to it and everyone can add to it. And they were like, well, you know, and they were like, we're going to take all this, we're going to, you know, form it together. We have our own ideas, but we want to hear from you all as well. And you know, they put it together, and then we went through some meetings of finalizing and filtering some things, and it's something that we're all proud of, and we all had a hand in creating it. And if they hadn't thought about exactly how to operationalize that co-creation, that could have been a mess, because, you know, I initially wasn't really understanding how they were doing it, and then, you know, when I saw that it was all cool on the thing, I was like, oh, this is so awesome. And, you know, I got to fill in some stuff, and yeah, I think it's going to be really awesome. So that's one example. I'm still looking for that scholarship. You know, it's really hard to, it should not be this hard to find, right? Uh, let's see, another question. Talk about seeing birds. Given what we learned about the dark history of J.J. Audubon, yes. Yes. Do you think the National Audubon Society should change its name? Paul, that's a really great question. I don't officially have a position on whether or not Audubon should change its name, but changing a name is not changing the culture. Changing the name isn't rewriting history. Um, but changing the name would get a lot of people upset, because they're just like, oh, I have all this Audubon stuff. Now I gotta, you know, get it called something else. Because then that's the next question. What do we call it? If not Audubon, what do we call it? I want to return to that question. If anybody has names on what we would call the National Audubon Society if a new name was selected, please put that in the chat. Also, if you have a name for the podcast for the Starlings, that would be really great. We know what they're going to talk about Shakespeare, but we just need a name. So again, brainstorming that lid is still open. Next question here. Watching birds in my area. Oh yes. Oh, Debbie, preach. What are your thoughts on how nonprofits, local governments in our area are creating the natural environment that supports and attract birds throughout the city? In DC, I'm thinking, for example, Casey trees. Yes. So I'm still getting very new. I'm still very new to DC, especially in how I am learning the important areas for people and birds. You know, only recently did I, um, you know, have a place that I regularly got my hair cut. Then COVID happened, so now I gotta find a new place. Then I move, so you know there needs to be a new place that I go to, you know, and so I'm still figuring a lot of this stuff out. But the DC Audubon Society, those folks, a lot of them have been in DC a lot longer than me, and you know, through our programming, we do partner with DC Parks and Rec and the National Park Service on some things, or at least we have in the past. Um, I do like to add that all the environmental groups, you know, in DC, I hope that we can all make environmental progress together. Oh wow! Oh, you found the scholarship link. Wow, thank you. Wow, I'm way behind. I am so thank you though. I just found it. So I really appreciate it. Oh, Allison, I like your ideas about co-creation. The truth is that people of all walks of life love wildlife and have knowledge about them. Facts. Too often, diversity conversations are about serving different communities. I put italics verbally on the words that were quoted. I love to hear your ideas about engaging communities, listening to your view, even if they don't use the same buzzwords like we do. Yeah, buzzwords are totally a thing. They are useful. Hate them or love them. Using them, is kind of like a tool. If you want an easy way to do something, we have tools to make some of that easy. And sometimes those tools comes in the form of language, and language is its own thing as well. One thing I have and I practice too is like learning about a community, engaging a community is kind of like starting a relationship where you're just trying to figure out where people are coming from. So if I were to, I mean, I'm talking right now, but I did provide some background as to who I am. And so some of the things, I totally understand, Carolyn. Thank you so much. Um, but some of the things, that I've talked about come from my experience. You know, that being said, I think that listening to how a community speaks to itself is one of those ways that you can get that context, get that background, know where they're coming from before you say anything, before you start the engagement. I find it very, very important to read the local paper, to read even the local neighborhood paper, to read next door for everything that it is. Oh, it does help. But when you listen to how a community speaks to itself about itself, you can learn a lot more, and that's part of that really active listening that um, comes in the form of research. Basically, I guess what that looks like in real life. In real life, that's research. That's doing homework, and that's figuring out what the context is for some of these things. When I was an environmental educator in West Philadelphia, it was at Cobbs Creek Community Environmental Education Center, which was about 4 blocks down the street from where the move bombing occurred 35 years ago. And that move bombing, if you haven't heard of it, is basically a decision from the city of Philadelphia and the police to drop a bomb on a house, set fire to the block, killed innocent people. And that occurring 35 years ago is in a context that is entrenched with the experiences of police violence in that neighborhood, trafficking, neglect. When you look at the park, there's no park benches, there's no trash can, there's no street light. There's nothing that says, hey, you should be in this park to watch some birds. When I started working there was an environmental center. The trails were much more cleaner, but the impression that left was in the minds of the families, grandma, grandpa, grandson. They would know. They would say that. That's why they don't come to the park. So my work wasn't just come to the park because it's cool. It's come to the park because things have changed. Come to the park because environmental health reflects community health. And coming to the park also means that you're building a relationship with nature that helps us all understand some of the issues that we're facing on the block that we share. We know that when it rains, the street floods. We know when the street floods, there's trash everywhere. Now we can't prevent the rain. We can't prevent, we can't prevent the rain. And right now we can't prevent the trash. But what can we know? What solutions exist when we're thinking about street flooding? Green infrastructure, native plants. Having that understanding is saving cities money. It saves Philadelphia. It saves a lot of money in Philadelphia. When Philadelphia Water Department had the vision to think about, do we put X amount of money into replacing all of the pipes in our city and all of our storm drains so that it can help mitigate some of this street flooding? Or do we plant more, teach more, and engage more, and build a community, build an audience in Philadelphia, build a citizenry in Philadelphia, build a community, I should say, in Philadelphia that not only cares about the environment because they understand it's cool, it's nice to care for, but caring about the environment also means they're caring for their house, they're caring for their neighborhood. That's the environment too. So yeah, that answers your question. Oh, don't bring up indoor cats on next door. Oh my goodness. Don't get me started. Listen, I'm not a judgmental person. Where I am, everybody's judgmental. I just feel a strong sense of judgment to outdoor cat. Not even outdoor cat. You know, what would I feral cat? You know, like it's just like not even like, there's just so many philosophical issues that are kind of interesting to get into. And maybe that should be included in the next Big Year remake. Hopefully we get one of those. Excuse me. So let me Starling Darlings. Wow, that's it. That Allison, you hit it. That is the name. Starling Darlings. Mondays at 8. New podcast every week about Shakespeare from a birders point of not birders, from a bird's point of view. Oh, ducklings. Ducklings. Can you unmute yourself and say that? Because I'm
It's
not.
darlings.
Oh, wow. Starlings, darlings. Those are the type of ideas that are going to make the next generation so proud of us. They're going to be like, whoa, when Black Birders Week happened, the birding community grew. The birding community learned, and the birding community became better, not just for Black or white people, but for everybody who wants to bird. Whether they're walking, whether they're on a wheelchair, whether they're seeing the bird, whether they're hearing the bird. This is something that everybody can be a part of. And I want everybody to feel proud that, even though we have our individual roles in this movement, we share a responsibility to make sure the progress we achieve is progress for everybody. So with 5 minutes left, I want to answer any other questions, but I can tell you some. So a question I was expecting, what's my spark bird? Belted kingfisher. But what is my favorite bird? Northern cardinal. I love seeing the northern cardinal, especially in the winter, when there's like nothing else on the branches and you can just see like female or male. You'll see the beak, like the beak is always super vibrant. Oh, give us your contact information. Okay, well, I'll get that for you. Cardinal, kingfisher, still favorite. And green jay. I only saw it one time in my life, and I was in McAllen, Texas, 5 miles from the border, Mexico. And it was the last part of the birding trip. Didn't think I was going to see it. Turned around, saw it just about at eye level. And those things are bigger than you think. Those are pretty big. Favorite places to bird in DC right now: Piney Branch Trail near Rock Creek Park in Mount Pleasant, and Pathology Park, which is right next to Rayburn House office building. And that's where I did my congressional bird walks before I broke my ankle in January. It's right across the street from the U.S. Botanical Gardens. And in fact, they saw that I broke into the top 5 list because I kept going there. And they allowed me and the group of congressional staff into the garden earlier because we kept showing up to watch birds. And so that was a really cool way to show that birding opens the doors. Can you talk about your 2 podcasts in the next 3 minutes? Absolutely. So I host a podcast myself called Onward for Wildlife, where I discuss the intersection of politics and wildlife conservation. The first episode I did was on federal cruelty on coyotes. Apparently, and it's not just federal, it's state too. Apparently, they literally do coyote rallies where they just go out and see how many people can kill however many coyotes or the biggest coyote. It's literally state-sponsored killing of coyotes. Doesn't make any sense. Great episode. Check it out. The most recent episode was actually about community-centric fundraising and how fundraising, if we start and ground our fundraising in social justice and advancing racial justice and equity, then it will be a better wildlife conservation community for everybody. And the second podcast that I do is with my homie Tony, my first boss, my mentor, my best friend. It's called Brothers in Birding, and we talk about some of our adventures and the day-to-day things. That's more of a talk show, less of a podcast. What strategies did you find successful to encourage people to come to your park in Philly? You know, I'd be ignoring a lot if I didn't say the way I have a gift of the gab didn't have a role in it, because you know, it helps if you tell a joke or two, if you can point out the obvious in a way that is affirming and relatable. You know, like there's a difference between, I guess, answering the question as to like what anyone could do with strategy versus like what I did, and I try to make it applicable to everybody. But I'd like to think what made my thing way of doing it was just that I kept telling jokes, not because I actually know anything. But I did balance well with people who actually knew stuff. So that's something to think about. And also, if you like improv, or I think that there's like a Venn diagram of people who like improv and then birdwalk leaders. And I don't know exactly what all is in some of the things, but if you just like, if the improv thing is really, I felt like even in high school, I did this event called extemporaneous speech where you got a quote and you got to talk about it for 7 minutes. I did really well with that. And so for me, I can just take a little bit and, work with it a lot. Oh, do I feel like testing out my stand-up material? Yeah. Okay. Can I go past 8 o'clock? Oh, it's 8 o'clock now. Is it going to shut off? No?
You
Okay.
may have 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, this is about to be the best joke you're ever going to hear. So when I broke my ankle in January, I had my surgery in February. And as I'm getting ready for the surgery, and I kept saying meet Anastasia. They're going to put I go to sleep. In my preparation of that, I was like, I bet I can tell a joke before I go under, wake up and say the punchline. And they say when you wake up, you actually won't really be you won't be lucid. That was the word they used. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I'm going to try. And so I'm in the operating room and they're about to put the mask on and they're like, okay, say the first part of the joke. I was like, okay, here it is. So back in the day, back when I was in college, I got on Tinder, and I had a lot of numbers on Tinder, not because I was popular, not because I was attractive, or not even because I met anybody, but because my bio said swipe right for jokes. Everybody wanted to hear a joke. So here's the joke. It's a joke about a joke about a joke. So I would start with, hey, want to hear a joke about pizza? To which they would say, yes. That was not back in the day. Anyway, they would say, yeah, I want to hear a joke. And I would say, it's really cheesy, ... And so when I said that part of the joke, that's when they put the mask on and then I went under. And then when I actually woke up, I was in pain and I was crying and I was like, what's happening? Ah! But they said before that, you actually woke up and said the punchline. And I was like, yes. And so when I woke up, they looked at me and they were like, it's really cheesy, ... And the delivery is always late. Thank you, everybody. It's been so nice. I'm glad we could do this. I did it within 3 minutes. But yeah, that's the best joke I ever told because I did it when I was lucid.
All right. Thank you so much, Tykee. And thanks everyone for your amazing support. We were delighted to have Tykee tonight. and very grateful for you. If you are here tonight, chances are that you will enjoy our presentations next week. We will have on Tuesday Leah Johnson speaking about the bluebirds of Longwood Gardens, and on Thursday we will have Mike Raup speaking about cicadas. I can't wait to hear all about the songsters of summer. And I am hoping that I get to see you all then. Have a great night. Thank you so much.